Here we have the beginning of the 8th of 20 turns for the Hougoumont scenario of Wellington's victory. Now, I've been playing the game and learning the game as I play it with this scenario. So I read the rules before about 3 or 4 years ago, and I sort of skimmed it before I started playing, and I thought I would learn as I was playing, because when I read it before there was nothing in it that I didn't understand. I had one or two questions about specific clarifications that I think no, it's only one that I had. I posted it on Board Game Geek, and I think it's been answered by my reading this time. But I skimmed the rules and I thought I'd learn it as I'm playing this game. Now, in this video, I thought I'd do two things. One is to sort of show you where I am in terms of learning the game, because it's quite a different system than, in some ways, than a standard sort of hex and counter war games. And then the other thing is, I think that because I've played enough to have a bit of a grasp of the system, to show you a playthrough of one turn, which I shouldn't think would take too long. It would take longer because I'm talking to you while I'm doing it, but I don't think it will take too long overall. And that will give you an idea of how the game is played. But just to note that this scenario is a sort of starter scenario, so there's no cavalry involved, and I haven't reread those rules yet, so it would not include cavalry charges and so forth, but I could mention what I know about them as an aside. So I think I'd like to say three things about my learning process of this game so far. And the first is that although the system is not that complicated and hard to understand, it does contain within the rules quite a lot of sort of small wrinkles that are very important, and I think it really needs a cheat sheet stroke player aid. Now there's certain things like we have here shot combat results table, which you have a percentage ratio, and then you also have effectiveness, i.e. sort of morale effectiveness rating differential, which you cross-reference to get your result. But what you don't have, it's buried in the rules, in the shot combat result, it's in the appropriate section, but you also have two other results, which possibilities which are not marked on here. In fact, three. So one is what happens is if it's 50% ratio or less. I added that on, or less, because you use the same column. Why they didn't just write 50% ratio or less on there for you, I don't know. Similarly up here, if the differential is -3 or less, it's automatically this result. Again, that could just have been annotated onto here, just so you know. And then finally, it goes up to 300% ratio, but at 400% ratio, as long as the differential is not this one, but is one of these, then you have an automatic this result. So again, those three little annotations are necessary in formulating, in running your combats, and they should be on the table, but they're not. It makes me wonder, why are little things like that not put on player aids? I mean, often I think decisions are made not to make them too busy, but to me that is essential, because it's otherwise you're left with the question begging. You have to go and look in the rules for the case section. Where are the rules? I thought I'd just quickly show you how you'd have to check that. So, for example, you'd have to find shock. So it's not that hard. There's not too many. You have not an index, but a chapter headings and so forth. So unfortunately, there's no specific index. But anyway, you'd find shot combat, and then you would have to go through the shot combat. You'd have to remember to go past the cavalry all the way to the end, to the explanation of combat results. And then this is where those things are mentioned. So you see, there's nothing in the rules that makes that stand out. So it's just part of all the other results which are put on here. So why not days? I don't know. I find decisions like that strange. Then the other thing is this, like you've got the artillery ranges. Again, the artillery ranges are mentioned in the book, but we all know, we're war gamers who play many games, so we can't necessarily remember what are the artillery ranges for this game. And with many things, I think with rule books, is that the designer and the playtesters have been playing it so much, they're so familiar with it, they forget these little things that starter players need, because especially these days we rarely get to play a game sort of 10 times in a row, so it becomes second nature. So minimum range 1 to 2, why didn't they just put it 3 to 4, 5, 6? Easy enough to, in fact that's not 5, 6, 5 to 8, you see. So you've got to remember little things like that. So it's not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, blah. And then also here you can have 3 rank lines and 2 rank lines. And that, again, in the rules it's in there, but just a tiny little annotation to remind you who can actually be 2 rank lines, because it's not all the Allied units. It's never the French, but it's only some of the Allied units. Either you have to remember that off by heart, how many of us manage that, or else you have to keep checking the rule book. And then again, target classes. So you have target classes, for example, the easiest target class to hit 1 is columns, squares, enfiladed mass targets. Goes down through skirmishers, to anybody in soft cover or units behind skirmishers. So you can, normally you have to fight the nearest unit. In certain situations, if the skirmisher has units behind it, then artillery fire can pass through to that screen target. Then target class 5 is listed as hard cover, but what they forgot to mention, that is also if you have a command unit in a hex on its own. So normally command units are only hit under certain circumstances if the unit's there with a hit, but if they're on their own they can be hit, and then they're that target class. They're not if they're in hard cover. And then finally you have shock combat results. So D1, so that's disorder, lose a point, strength, disorder, retreat, lose 1 strength, and rout. And I've added in the brackets what is different for skirmishers, because those results are different for skirmishers, and that is not a minor thing, because skirmishers are a major part of this game. So there's that. Then the other thing I have to mention is that I found that because I kept having to look back into the rules to check novel or innovative little wrinkles that I needed to remember weren't on. I mean, essentially these are all the player aids you have: the results tables, a terrain key, and abbreviated sequence of play. There's a few others on the map edges that are various tracks for tracking some things. So what I found is I had to start annotating, or rather summarising the rules for myself. Now we all know, when we're revising for stuff, that's very helpful to repeat it yourself in your own words and condense it. So I've basically been doing that. So I've got notes for play of Wellington's victory, the game. I start with command rules and army morale. A little note on the command phase. Then all of that's about morale, mostly about unit morale and rally. Yeah, in fact, all about unit morale and morale, because army morale is a slightly different thing. Well, it's a very different thing, although it's still morale. Then terrain. I've listed all terrain on here, including line of sight rules. While I'm at that, I'll just mention that the line of sight rules are again a bit novel, so I had to draw little diagrams for me to try and understand how they work. And then, as they advise in the rules, or it's rather in the designers or players' notes, spend half an hour just testing out line of sight, using their line of sight formulae just to see how it works. And I did that. Then these are cases that came up in the play, and my sort of reformulation of their rule, because essentially their rule is you find the highest unit, then you find all the hexes of the same level towards the target. So say this is the highest unit is here, and there's 4 hexes at the same level, inclusive of the target. That's step 2. Then step 3, if this is the target, you find how many hexes at the same level as the target are towards the firer, in this inclusive. So in this case that's only 1. If we were here, that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. So there'd be 4 same level as firer, 4 same level as target. And then you find the level difference. So in either of these two cases, that's 1. And then you times it by this number, the number of lower level target hexes. And then you subtract the level difference times this number from this number. And if it is 0 or less, it's you have line of sight. If it's above 0, then you have no line of sight. So that's how they word it. And essentially, it's this formula. So there's A. That's the firer, the highest, well, not necessarily the firer, but the highest unit, and its hexes. And then B is those lower hexes times by the height. So B times by C is less than or equal to A, then you have line of sight. So it's actually quite a simple formula, but took a little bit of getting used to because it's different from others I've seen. And I think I've found an anomaly. So, example, we were here, and let me just try and hold this steady. Where's my finger? So, you see this artillery unit is actually limbered itself up because it found it couldn't fire here. Now it's on a white square which is 2 levels lower than this lower than this yellow level. Now sorry, I said it couldn't fire, but in fact, according to the calculation, at 2 levels lower than this particular lower level, so 2 hexes away, and this only being 1 hex, it did have line of sight. But if this, for example, was not a white hex, but one of these tan ones, so 1 level below the yellow, it didn't have line of sight. Let me demonstrate it here. So, for example, that in this case is the target, and that's the firer. So 1 hex, 2 levels, and then 2 hexes away. Apparently there is line of sight there, whereas there isn't line of sight in this case. So seems a little bit of an anomaly for their formula. So I think at certain tight situations like that, it might not quite work. But as an example, in other cases, for example, there's an artillery unit under here. This one, if this was at, again, just 1 hex, 1 level rather than 2 levels below, it could not fire at this, even though it could have fired at it if it was here, or I think here. But as we see, this is not just like a plateau, it's kind of like a sloping slope with, I guess, considerable undulations and so forth. So that's just a quick bit about line of sight.